L'kuta Sichos Chelek Chavav, Vayakhel Sicha Aleph, Nishmas Rabbi Yosef ben Yamin, ben Rabbi Menashe Kaltman. We are also learning the Schos, our dear friend, Yosef Shleima ben Risha, for Refuah Shleima Ukreva. We have a fascinating Sicha today that's going to combine three Rashis, one from Parshas Vayakhel, two from Parshas Kisisa, all on the same topic, of course, the topic of the fact that although the Mishkan was so important to be built, it did not override the prohibition of Shabbos. You could not build the Mishkan on Shabbos. The Rebbe will teach us how the three Rashis complement each other, and that every single word of Rashi and every message of Rashi is precise. It is absolutely enjoyable. Come with me on this journey. The parsha begins that Moshe gathered all of the Jewish people. He said to them, 6 days a week you should do malacha, and then you shall rest on Shabbos. Rashi quotes the word 6 days a week. When it's Mefarish, and Rashi says, Hiktim lohem azhara Shabbos. He prefaced with the prohibition of Shabbos, Litzivim Malachas HaMishkan, before the mitzvah of building the Mishkan. Of course, in Parshas Truma and Tetzaveh and part of Kisisa, the Eibishter is commanding Moshe Rabbeinu to tell the Yidden about the building of the Mishkan. Now in Parshas Vayakhel and Pkudei, Moshe Rabbeinu conveys the commandments of the building of the Mishkan to the Yidden. The Parsha begins that Moshe gathered the Yidden, tells them first about the prohibition against desecrating Shabbos. Then he tells them about building the Mishkan, Loimar, to teach them that the building of the Mishkan does not override Shabbos. Vimen led into Pashtus is Kavanas Rashi on the most basic level. Rashi's telling intent, Ados was the Torah is Maktimas Hara Shabbos Letzivim Lechas HaMishkan, the fact that the Torah prefaces the prohibition of Shabbos to the commandments of the building of the Mishkan is abavais. It is to prove. It shows us as Hara Shabbos is harber. Vider Tzivim Lechas HaMishkan, that the prohibition of Shabbos is more severe than the commandment of the building of the Mishkan. Und der Riber is Lechas HaMishkan Deiche Shabbos, and therefore the building of the Mishkan is not Deiche Shabbos. In other words, Shabbos is more important. Shabbos is more serious, and therefore you stop the building of the Mishkan in order to observe Shabbos. Is kashav v'mefarshim fregin. So the mefarshim have an issue with this Rashi. Men gefindt kam apamim wo stehen zwei zivuyim besmicha zelazeh, und Rashi is mefarish as der meuchar is deicha damugdam. The question is that from what we're understanding is that the proof that Shabbos is more important is from the fact that Moshe says it first. The problem the mefarshim have with this is that we find other commandments in the Torah where we find that the second one, the latter commandment is more important than the former. The second one is more important than the first. First example we'll bring is from the very topic that we are discussing. Shabbos Melechas HaMishkan, the observance of Shabbos versus the building of the Mishkan. Go back one parsha, in Parshas Kisisa. If in Pasuk V'ata Daber, you should speak to the Jewish people. Ach es Shabbosai Tishmeru, however, my Shabbos you should keep, you should observe. Gomer. V'diteira is makdim dem tzivim Melechas HaMishkan faras on Shabbos. Where in Parshas Kisisa the Torah is speaking first about the building of the Mishkan and only second about the observance of Shabbos. Is Rashi mefarish? Rashi goes on and explains. Even though you're going to be driven by the alacrity of the building of the Mishkan, Shabbos al tidacha mipanot, you should still not override Shabbos. Shabbos should not get pushed aside because of it. Which means to say that Shabbos is the more important one, even though Shabbos comes second. Which is contrary to what Rashi seems to be implying here, that because Shabbos comes first, that's what makes it to be more important. Another example, it's totally on a different topic, but it still makes the same point. In Parashat Kedoshim it says, a person has a mitzvah to fear, to be in awe of his father and his mother. And the pasuk continues, and you should keep my Shabbos. The very same Rashi, the very same commentator, that said these two things in Parshas Kisisa and in our Parsha Vayakhel says over there in Kedoshim Somach Shmina Shabbos L'meida Av, that the pasuk juxtaposes the observance of Shabbos to the Meida, to the fear of the father. Lemar, to tell you, Af al pishi zaticha al Meida Av, even though I have commanded you with regards to fearing your father, Im yemer la chalilas Shabbos, but if the father says to desecrate Shabbos, al tishma, you don't listen. So again, Shabbos comes second, and yet Shabbos is the more important one that overrides the first one, the mitzvah of Meida Av, of fearing the father. Unda, to conclude the Rebbe's question, which is the question of the Mefarshim, is Rashi Madgish. Rashi seems to be implying, to emphasizing, as the Yikdim is Shabbos is Mishkan, that the fact that it comes first in Parshas Vayakhel is the proof that Shabbos overrides the building of the Mishkan. So how do you reconcile that? How can you say that the Hikdim, the fact that it comes first, is the proof if these other two examples that the Rebbe brings, Shabbos comes second, and yet Shabbos overrides the mitzvah, whether it's Melechas HaMishkan or Meida Av. Mefarshim Enfidin. So in Sif Beis, the Rebbe brings an answer that the Mefarshim give. The Parshas Tisa is Rashi Mefarish, as Meleren Dasab von Wort Ach. Rashi explains the sentence that says Ach es Shabsoisei Tishmeru. The word Ach, that's where the limud comes from. That's where this understanding comes from. Because kol achin v'rakin mi'utin, wherever it says in the Torah ach or rak, it's there to form an exclusion. So in this case, when it says ach, it excludes Shabbos from work of the Mishkan. That you're not allowed to do the work of the Mishkan on Shabbos. So in Parshas Kisisa, there is a specific limud of ach that teaches us that Shabbos overrides working in the Mishkan, building the Mishkan. Now, in Parshas Kedoshim, similarly in Parshas Kedoshim, where the Torah tells us the importance of Shabbos, even more important than Meida Av, is Rashi Mamshech in the Dibur Shalachas. Rashi continues in the next Dibur, in the next Rashi. Ani Hashem Elokeichem, these are the words of the pasuk, I am Hashem your God. Says Rashi, Atav avicha chayav mikvedi, both you and your father are obligated to honor me. Lefichach mi Hashem, lefichach leitishma lein levat lesdvari. And therefore you should not listen to your father if it means to ignore my words. So that's how you know that Shabbos is more important than Meida Av, because there's a clear pasuk, Ani Hashem Elokeichem, das heißt. So the Mefarshim explain, as in die beide Fallen, Muzman onkumen zu die Wörter, ach und Ani Hashem Elokeichem, that in these two cases we need an extra limud, whether the word ach, as it is in Kisisa, or Ani Hashem Elokeichem, as it is in Parshas Kedoshim, Shubavarin and Shabbos wird nit nitche from Melechas HaMishkan and Meida Av, that Shabbos does not get overridden by these two other mitzvahs. Is der fun gufe verstandig? So from this we can deduce, as Adrabah, Bechlal is der muktim dechet ucher, that generally speaking, as Rashi says in our parsha, the first one is the more important one that overrides the second one. Und der Riber, and therefore, Lule di psukim ach by Melechas HaMishkan in Parshas Kisisa, und Ani Hashem Elokeichem by Meida Av. And because of that, if not for the additional psukim, either the pasuk of ach by Parshas Kisisa or the pasuk Ani Hashem Elokeichem in Kedoshim, we would have thought, as weil the tzivuyim of Melechas HaMishkan and Meida Av stein frier, that because in those cases the building of the Mishkan or the fear of the father come first, Shabbos, you would have thought that they actually override Shabbos. In other words, the Mefarshim seem to have a very beautiful compromise. Generally speaking, we do follow the order. And like we do in this parsha, whatever comes first, that's the more important one. As people would say, first things first. You have to say, what you say first is what's most important. In those cases, we're going with the second one. That's because those cases have a special limud. If not for the special limud, we would have taken down with the first one. But over there's a special limud, either the limud of ach or the limud of Ani Hashem Elokeichem, and that's why we're going with the second one, because there's a special limud. But if there wasn't an extra pasuk or an extra word in the pasuk, I would have gone with the first, because that's the rule, and that rule works in our Rashi. Maybe that's the pshat. Says the Rebbe, but in derech hapshat is a bir nit maspik. This explanation is not sufficient. If you're going to say that we do follow kedima ve'ichur. We do follow the order of the psukim. And if something comes first, that means, unless there's an exclusion, but that means that that's more important. Then we could ask a question on that. Going back to Kisisa, why would the Torah put Melechas HaMishkan first? Or similarly in Kedoshim, the mitzvah of fearing your father first. And because that came first, I then have to add a special limit in those other two cases to tell me that Shabbos is greater. Why did Hashem have to do that? If Kedima V'Ichur works, if the order works, and the thing that comes first is de facto the more important thing, unless there's a specific inclusion, then why couldn't the Torah not just do that? Put Shabbos first, before Melechas HaMishkan in Kisisa, before Moira Av in Kedoshim, and from the order itself, you would have known that Shabbos is more important, and you wouldn't need the limud of Ach or Ani Hashem Alekechem. In other words, the Rabbi is saying that from the fact that the Torah uses a limud in those cases, it tells us that Kedima doesn't work, that the order doesn't work. As the Rebbe says himself at the Fun Mashma, from the fact that the way the Torah tells us that Shabbos is more important is from the word Ach, or the word Ani Hashem Alekechem, teaches us that the order itself would not have taught me that the first is more important than the second. There has to be a clear, explicit pasuk or way to learn to exclude what has to be excluded. That's what we see from those other two cases. That the Torah could have just switched the order, and that would have told us the information. From the fact that the Torah does not do that, that implies to us that the order doesn't work. And this brings us back to our question. Here, our Rashi Vayakhel implies that the fact that Shabbos comes first tells us loymar that Mishkan is not deicha Shabbos. The Shabbos does not get overridden by the Mishkan. So the question is, from those other two cases, it is clear that Kedima V'Ichur, the order, doesn't work to teach us what's more important. So how does Rashi rely on that order in this Rashi? Now, when gefindt an Ariches in Mefarshei Rashi, welcher verentfern die Kusche hanau mit verschiedenen Terusim und Chilukim. We do find in the commentaries on Rashi various different explanations to answer this question on Rashi. In other words, this is not the Rebbe's question. The Rebbe said, "Vi mefarshim fragen." This is a very obvious question in mefarshim. These two Rashis seem to contradict. In other words, the halacha doesn't change. In other words, in both cases, Melechas HaMishkan stops for Shabbos. But here it implies that it's because of the Higdim, and over there in Kisisa, it's Fakert Shabbos Taka last. So there are many answers the Mefarshim give. Then we can uplearn from Kedima that there are certain cases when you could use the order of the psukim as the Ershtet Tzivus Dechad and Satan, that the first one is overrides the second. But we can't delve into those commentaries, because as the Rebbe spoke many times, Rashi hat geschrieben sein Pirush al Teire in Asignen as Eichem Mechamis Lemikros will kennen verstehen kann as Rashi von seine gezählte Werte. The way Rashi writes that even the Ben Chamish, even the 5-year-old, should be able to understand what Rashi tries to say from Rashi's very own words, even if they are very brief and concise. Rashi's few words will give you everything you need to know. Also without needing extra explanation. Especially since in this case there's such a debate in the commentaries of Rashi with various different reasons. Is the Chelek nit mistaber zu sagen as Rashi meint b'pshuti shel Pirush Rashi akoparam di alerli biurim? It's difficult to say that Rashi intended for us to understand those other explanations. Without telling us which one he follows. And therefore, it makes sense to say, as beim Lernen die Wörter von Rashi atzmam, that by learning the words of Rashi themselves, if you just look at the words of Rashi without any mefarshei Rashi, without any commentaries that try to explain, just by looking at the words of Rashi, is altzmuvon musbar. Everything is understood and everything is explained as is fallen up b'derech memela d'shaylas anal, and all of the above questions, not all, but the above questions, which primarily is the seeming contradiction between Rashi here and Rashi in Kisisa, it falls away. It's not even a question. So we're holding Siv Gimel, where the Rebbe presented a question which the Rebbe concluded that it cannot be that Kedima ve'ichur, that the order of the commandments have an implication on the importance of them. And therefore, we have to understand, what does it mean when Rashi says hiktim loymar, that Rashi that over here that we're learning it from the fact that Shabbos comes first. So in Sif Gimel, the Rebbe is going to explain our Rashi. In Sif Daled, the Rebbe is going to ask a question. Then the Rebbe is going to go back to explain the Rashi's in Kisisa, and then it's going to come back to this Rashi. But the answer will be understood will begin to be understood in Sif Gimel. Their beard and them yishlein pashtos, and the explanation is fairly simple. When Rashi says the words that Moshe prefaced, he began with the prohibition of Shabbos, and this is to teach you that the building of the Mishkan does not override Shabbos. Is Rashi nit uisen zu sagen, as von dem was die Teire is the maktim as Shabbos for dem tzivim melechas Mishkan, let him up them din as melechas Mishkan is nit deicha Shabbos. Rashi does not mean to say that because the Teire put it in this order, this is the source, this is the origin from where we learn in Torah that the building the Mishkan does not override Shabbos. That's not what Rashi says. That's what we understood till now. And therefore we had the question, 1 second, how do you learn it from Hiktim if Hiktim doesn't work? But the Rebbe is now saying that that is not what Rashi is telling us. Rashi is not telling us that the source in Torah, how do I know that Shabbos is more important? Because in Parshas Vayakhel, the Torah says a Shabbos before Mishkan. That is not the pshat of Rashi. Varum, and the explanation is so brilliantly simple that you can't even argue. Because this din, the din that Shabbos is more important than building the Mishkan, is already written in Parashas Kisisa. When Hashem commands Moshe, yes, the very pasuk that we've been talking about since the beginning of the Sikha. Rashi is dort mefarish lemayit Shabbos melechas Mishkan. Rashi says that it teaches us to exclude Shabbos from the building of the Mishkan. Und she's moving may love, and it's self-understood as when Teira did till the noch of Parshasenu. Wie Moshe hat gegeben Eden the tzivuim of Shabbos melechas Mishkan, that Moshe conveyed to Yidden the commandments, both to observe Shabbos and to build a Mishkan. Moshe conveys it exactly as it was told to him in Parashas Kisisa, as Erod gesagt Eden, as Melechas HaMishkan is Nechas Shabbos. Moshe is telling the Yidden that the building of the Mishkan does not override Shabbos. So to tell me that I'm going to learn this limud from Vayakhel, not necessary. I already know it from Parashas Kisisa. No, the diugda is, so what is Rashi specifying here? Hiktim lohem as har Shabbos. Not about the Hashem's commandment being presented with Shabbos first. The discussion over here is going to be about Moshe's conveying it to them in this order. In other words, not about the Torah putting it in this order, which could have been used as a limud. That's not necessary, because we already know from Parshas Kisisa that this is the din. But then, for some reason, Moshe, when he talks to the Yidden, hiktim lahem, when he speaks to them, he puts Shabbos first. And that's what Rashi is addressing. And the Rebbe continues to explain. But Rashi is shver. Rashi has a question. Since when Hashem speaks to Moshe, he says Mishkan first and then Shabbos. Was hat Moshe Rabbeinu Mishane given? Beim Übergeben die Zivim zu Eden, hiekt im Lemas Shabbos. Why does Moshe change the order? And then when he conveys these commandments to the Yidden, he puts Shabbos first. Hiktim lohem is Rashi addressing not the source of the halacha. It's addressing the fact that Moshe changed the way the Eibishter did it and does it differently. He talks to the Yidden. He's there to convey the Eibishter's commandments as it was given to him, and yet he puts Shabbos first. That's what's bothering Rashi. Of them and for Rashi, and therefore Rashi answers, Leimar, Shenedeches Shabbos. This was to teach that it's not Deches Shabbos. That in other words, that the building of the Mishkan does not override Shabbos. Meaning, as Meleches Mishkan is the Deches Shabbos, since part of Moshe's job was to convey to them this detail that Meleches Mishkan does not override Shabbos. As it was told to him in Parshas Tisa, therefore Moshe, in order to emphasize this to the Yidden, they should remember that Shabbos is more important. He starts with Shabbos, not because that's where the halacha is learned from. The halacha is learned from Kisisa. But Moshe wants to emphasize it. As the Rebbe says in the next paragraph, Moshe doesn't just put it in this order and they're going to guess. Moshe actually was his job. Moshe actually tells the Yidden, by the way, you should just know that Melechas HaMishkan is not Deiches Shabbos. He tells it to them explicitly. It's not just something that they're deducing or deriving from the order. But in addition to that, in addition to him telling them the halacha as it is, explicitly, he does more than that. In order to intensify by the Yidden the severity of the mitzvah of Shabbos, in addition to telling them the halacha, which was taught to him in Parshas Kisisa, and Moshe certainly tells it over to them. In addition to that, he puts it first to show them, to emphasize to them that how important it is. This, because of this, automatically, there's no question that we were having before in Rashi. How do you reconcile these Rashis? Where in one Rashi it implies that the first one is more important, and the other Rashis implies that the second one is more important. It's not a question. It never was a question in the first place. Vayakhel said that because in our parsha, Rashi is not talking about the origin of the din, the source of the din. Rashi is just talking about Moshe's presentation. And therefore, the hiktim is not about din. Not to tell us that you're learning from the order. In fact, the learning was from Kisisa. The order was just an extra emphasis in Moshe's presentation. And the Rebbe adds here in the parentheses that what one can say as from Kedima v'yichur came in the top learning. That in the pshat level, you can't learn from the order of the psukim. As the muktim is machriya and is dechet demucher, that the first one overrides the second one. In other words, clearly the order is not a form, a way of understanding what's more important. As we see in the later in Kisisa and in Kedoshim, we taka the second one was more important. Taka true, it was for because of there's an extra limud over there. But if Kedima v'yichur worked, then over there the Torah would have put Shabbos first. Clearly Kedima v'yichur doesn't work. Over here, what's Rashi talking about? Rashi is not talking about the origin of the din. He's talking about the presentation of Moshe. In Sif Tal, the Rebbe is going to ask the question, as we say in Yiddish, overfort, as in, why taka does Moshe feel that this extra emphasis is needed? The Eibishter taught him a halacha. Moshe has to convey that halacha to the Yidden. The halacha is that Melechas HaMishkan, the work of the Mishkan, does not override Shabbos. Good. Why does Moshe feel the need for an emphasis? That's what the Rebbe is going to ask in Sif Dalet. And the Rebbe is going to take us back to the other two Rashis. Explain you don't even know that there's two Rashis yet. The Rebbe is going to tell us that there are two Rashis. And the Rebbe is going to explain them to us in the most beautiful way. And then automatically we'll understand why this emphasis was needed by Moshe Rabbeinu. But it move on. Since when Hashem talks to Moshe, he does not preface Shabbos before the Mishkan. Which is why we have the limit of Ach, because Ach it comes later. Or since he has the miyut of Ach, so therefore he could start with as hard as Shabbos. He could start with Melechas HaMishkan. If Hashem didn't feel the need to emphasize it, why does Moshe feel the need to emphasize it? Und damit Mishana sein mit Seder HaTzivuim, wie sie seine gesagt geworden, der HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and thus change the order of how it was given to him from Hashem. Then we das verstehen, beachten wir in Pirish Rashi from Pasuk Kanal Parashat Tisa. So to explain the answer to this question, why does Moshe feel that the Yidden need to have an extra emphasis about the importance of Shabbos when it comes to building the Mishkan? We first have to go back to the Rashi in Kisisa. Over there, the pasuk says, "Va'ata daberu b'nei Yisrael lemer," and you should speak to the Jewish people, saying, "Ach es shabsosai tishmeru." However, you should observe my Shabbos. Rashi stellt sich in ersten Dibur Maschil auf die Wörter "Va'ata daberu b'nei Yisrael." So the first Dibur, Rashi quotes the words, "And you should speak to the Jewish people," and is mefarish and explains, "Va'ata you, Moshe, af al pi she'ifkadaticha letzavesem amlechas hamishkan." Even though I appointed you to command the Jewish people with regards to building the Mishkan, al yekal be'einecha l'tcheses haShabbos mipnei ha'malacha. It should not be easy in your eyes to override Shabbos with the building of the Mishkan. In other words, even though I'm giving you this power, nevertheless, you should not utilize it to say that Mishkan is more important than Shabbos. Weiter is Rashi mefarish, and then Rashi continues. What you should keep my Shabbos. Says Rashi, even though you're going to be driven and excited with the alacrity of this building of the Mishkan, Shabbos al tidacha mipanel, you should not override Shabbos. And then Rashi says, Kol achin v'rakin, that whenever this says the word ach or the word rak in the Torah, it serves to teach an exclusion, and in this case we're excluding Shabbos from building of the Mishkan. From Pastor Shlosh and Rashi is muchach. You look at Rashi on a very basic level, it seems implicit. Adozayin and Sevas under Azaris. There's two prohibitions, two commandments as melechas hamishkan zonadechas zayin Shabbos. Eine von iberikim word va'ata. One from the extra word va'ata, because you could have said daber al bnei Yisrael, speak to the Yidden. Va'ata daber. Va'ata is an extra thing which Rashi is saying. Va'ata, you, even though you're in charge of the melechas of teaching melechas hamishkan, it shouldn't be deicha Shabbos. Und von miyotach. The implication that we have from this Rashi is that there's two prohibitions. Is dit move on? And the Rebbe has a series of questions on this Rashi and this understanding. Question number one, and the Mefarshim asked this question, why do you need two Azaris? They seem to be saying the exact same thing. Don't allow the work of the Mishkan to override Shabbos. Why does the Pasuk need to say it twice, or why does the Pasuk need to give us two limudim for it? Base. Question 2. We learned men up from word the ata daber of Israel as al yekal beinachal it cheses Shabbos mipnei malacha. Where in the word the ata, it might be a superfluous word, which might come to teach us something. But where do you see in that word that it's teaching us that you should not find it easy in your eyes to override Shabbos with Mishkan? Additionally, we have to understand the arichas lashon v'nashe in the two pirushim, the long-windedness of Rashi in both pirushim, und die shinuyim zwischen sei, as well as the various differences between the two pirushim in Rashi. And the Rebbe points out three things. Aleph, the diuk haloshin afal pisha hifkadaticha letzaveisom melechas hamishkan. I appointed you to command them about building the Mishkan. Kilu asav dem is a given amini miyuchad, implying that there was a specific appointment for this mitzvah. And the Rebbe's question, Gans Teiro mitzvah, says Rabbeinu, the entire Teiro mitzvah was conveyed to the Jewish people by Moshe Rabbeinu. So that would mean including the Melechas HaMishkan. Why is there a hifkadaticha implying that there was a specific appointment by the Eibishter that Moshe should teach them about building the Mishkan? What's the purpose of it? Beis al yekal be'einecha lidchais. the Rashi says it should not be easy in your eyes to override Shabbos for this work. It's a very long phrase. Rashi sagt it bekitzer. Why doesn't he just say much more concisely, al tidacha? It shouldn't be overridden. The kayetz or something similar to that. V'loshen Rashi asks me take if nachtem in the Satan dibur, as Rashi does say in the second Rashi, al tidacha mipaneha. It should not be overridden for it. That's it. It gives you all the information you need, seemingly. Why do you need Rashi to say al yekal beinecha? You shouldn't find it easy in your eyes, etc. Gimel third. In the Satan dibur brings Rashi a nine. In the second Rashi, in Kisisa, he brings a whole new idea. Afal Pishatiyu, the Dufin, who's reason that the Yidden are driven and they're excited about building the Mishkan. Where does this come from? And why is it applicable specifically in the second Dibur? Why couldn't they bring it up in the first Dibur? That even though you were you're appointed to teach the Melechas HaMishkan, but nevertheless the Yidden would be driven or excited. Why is it unique? Why does it belong uniquely to the second Rashi? So, very quickly, number one, why do we need two commandments? Number two, what's the connection of Va'ata and Al Yekal Be'einecha? The word Va'ata, that Moshe would find it easy in his eyes. Why is there an implication that Moshe was given a specific appointment here, different than all the other mitzvahs? Why does Rashi speak in a more longer language? And three, why does Rashi bring in this concept of, or what is the source of Rashi's, where he brings up the idea that the Yidden are driven and excited, and this might lead them to override the building of the Mishkan, and why is that specifically in the second Rashi? And the Rebbe begins now the beer. The first thing the Rebbe is going to do is going to explain why there are two azharos, why there are two commandments. The chilek says when they say Pirush Rashi is the difference between the two Pirushim in Rashi, meaning to say both in Kisisa. The first one on the word Va'ata, and the second one on the word Ach, is as follows. In the Meshkan Dibur, wo Rashi stellt sich auf die Werte Va'ata, daber al bnei Yisrael, es a klapi Moshe atzmei. Hashem is talking to Moshe about himself, about Moshe himself. Und wie Rashi is madgis Pilusheni, as you will see, is emphasized in Rashi's words, Afal pishi if kadaticha, I appointed you, Litzaveisam, Al Yekal Beinecha, in your eyes, V'chulu, where he's speaking B'lashon Yachid in a single term, because he's talking to one individual, to Moshe Rabbeinu. Mashaykin in the Zweiten Dibur, Achesh Abseisei Tishmeiru. Tishmeiru is Lashon Rabim, is in the plural tense. Ret Rashi B'shayches to Bnei Yisrael, Hashem is commanding Moshe about the Yidden. And as you see in the words of Rashi, you in the plural will be driven, etc. And that's why you need two. Tarti Lamadi, we asked the question, why do we need two? The answer is because one is talking to Moshe Rabbeinu, one is about Moshe Rabbeinu, one is about the Yidden. You can't compare how Moshe is addressed with regards to the fact that Melechas HaMishkan should not override Shabbos, as the way you would present it to the Yidden. And that's why there are different expressions in the two different Rashis, because since you're talking about two different crowds, it has to be said separately, because it has to be said in a different language, in a different expression. The Asbara in them, and the Rebbe explains. And the Rebbe is going to start first with Yidden and then go back to Moshe. Even though the first Rashi is about Moshe, the second Rashi is about Yidden, but the Rebbe will first explain the Rashi about Yidden, and then he's going to explain about Rashi. The Asbara in them. Here's the explanation. In other words, what taka is the difference between when Hashem speaks about Moshe and he speaks about Yidden, and why does Rashi have to present them so differently? The tzivui of Melechas HaMishkan is gekumen late Pirush Rashi noch der Slicha af Chet HaEgel. The commandment to build the Mishkan, according to Rashi, comes after the forgiveness was given for the Chet HaEgel, after Yom Kippur. The Yom Kippur, Hashem says, Salachti kidvarecha, and then on Yud Aleph Tishrei, Moshe comes down and gives the Yidden the commandment to build the Mishkan. While their Mishkan is, Rashi is Mefarish, and Mishkan, according to Rashi, is Edus Yisrael, a testimony to the Yidden. Sheviter lehem HaKadosh Baruch Hu al ma'aseh Egel. The Eibusher forgave them for the deeds of the Egel. Shahare Hishchash Chesed B'neihem, as you see that that his Shechina is dwelling amongst them. So there is a cause and effect. The Mishkan is the testimony, is the proof of the forgiveness for the sin of the Chet Egel. Das sagt Rashi in dem zweiten Dibur. Therefore, in the second Rashi, he says, even though you're going to be driven and you're going to be excited, you're going to be working quickly to do this melacha, Shabbos alidach mipaneh. The chshas was man darf bewahren by Bnei Yisrael is the concern that's being addressed here is nicht as they wollen annehmen as melachas am Mishkan wegtiber und des Shabbos. Not that they would have thought that Mishkan outweighs, overrides Shabbos, but bepashtus, because simply, even though das atzim mit paskinen as melachas am Mishkan is des Shabbos, Yidden would have never paskin on their own accord that Mishkan is more important than Shabbos. Sie wollen sicher fragen am Moshe, nicht so sich für wie Shabbos. They would certainly go to Moshe and ask him what to do when it comes Shabbos. Should we continue? Or should we stop? So the concern wasn't that they would break the law or they wouldn't know the law, nor since they would realize that the dwelling of the Shechina is the proof that they were forgiven for Chet Egel, Velen ze sein und ze darfen sein, Redufin, they will be and they should be. Redufin, which is Yogin Zach, they will be rushed, mit Gourarie, Rizus, and work very quickly. To finish the building of the Mishkan, so that the atonement should come as soon as possible. And the Rebbe is all, and therefore it's possible, as this asks from the Difa, that this rush, this hasty occupation, this involvement, und Rizus, and working so quickly, soll Geirem sein, man soll nicht schwören zu tun in Melachas HaMishkan nicht b'Shabbos. It might cause them to make a mistake, because they're so in haste, they're working so quickly, they're working so rushed, they might make a mistake and end up doing Melachas HaMishkan on Shabbos. They're far bevarent than Eden, therefore they have to be warned. Even though you're going to be in a rush, you're going to be working very quickly, you're going to be driven, Shabbos al tidach mipaneh, be extra careful. When it comes Shabbos, make sure to stop, make sure to not do Melacha. Because we know you want to get this done as soon as possible, but Shabbos is more important. So when it comes to the Yidden, there is a very clear reason that, and Rashi explains the reason why the Yidden have to be warned, because they're rushing through it in order to get to the end, which is the complete atonement for the Mishkan, for the Chet Egel. Das ist aber bloß b'negia Yidden. But this whole concept only applies to the Yidden. Moshe was not connected to Chet Egel at all. He wasn't even on this world. And even after the Chet Egel, when the Yidden were, so to speak, excommunicated by Hashem, Hashem wasn't appearing, Hashem wasn't revealing himself to them. Moshe's tent served as an Oyel Moed, Makim Shechina, a place where the Shechina was. So Moshe has what Yidden are looking for, Hashras Hashchina, Moshe has it already. Is moving as Klapi Moshe Atzmis not given Shaykh Shas Mitzad to do for this reason. Moshe wasn't in a rush, or at least not in this kind of rush that could cause a mistake to be made and Shabbos to be desecrated. Ubifratas v'Rashi is mefarish, especially as Rashi says, Liyasa Moshe shum malacha b'Mishkan. Moshe did not do any malacha in the Mishkan. When we get to Mol Baruch, as it's discussed elsewhere in Likutei Sichos, Ados is Kavanas Rashi and Pasuk. This is what Rashi means at the end of our Sedra. When Rashi says, the Pasuk says, this is the thing that Hashem commanded. So Rashi says, this is what Hashem commanded to me to tell to you. As the tzivut to Moshe so he was arguing the whole commandment to Moshe about the building of the Mishkan was to be conveyed to the Yidden. Moshe himself was not commanded to build the Mishkan because Moshe had his own dwelling place for the Shechina. He didn't need the Mishkan. So therefore, since Moshe had a Makom Shechina, and therefore he wasn't rushed to build the Mishkan, and he wasn't even building the Mishkan at all, so again, there's no chashash of him himself being nichshol, so there's no reason to tell him, because it doesn't apply to Moshe. So if that's the case, why does Moshe need to be told anything at all? In the word Va'ata, we're going to learn something, and that's going to tell us why Moshe needed to be warned. Afal pishiv kadeticha litzavesa melechas hamishkan al yekel beinecha litcheses hashabbos b'bdeis melacha. You have a specific appointment on the melechas hamishkan, and this might cause you to find it easy in your eyes to override Shabbos, and therefore Moshe needed a warning, Kiddush Kamon, which the Rebbe will explain in Sivav. Rashi brings it up as of Parshas Tisa, the Meseder Mishnah. Rashi brings in the end of Parshas Kisisa the order in how Moshe taught Torah to Yidden. Nichnes Aaron Shana Moshe Pirkei. Aaron would come in and Moshe would teach him what he learned. Nichnes Ubanov, Aaron's children came in. Shana Lehem, then he learned it to them. Nichnes Uskenim Shana Lehem. Then this Canaan came in and then he taught it to them. Nichnesu kol ha'am shana lahem, and then the rest of the Jewish people came in and Moshe taught it to them. Nimtza b'yad kol ha'am echad, which means that everybody, the masses, heard it once. B'yad Askenim beis, the Askenim heard it twice. B'yad b'nei Aaron shleisha, the children of Aaron heard it 3 times. B'yad Aaron arba v'chulu k'tisa be'erevin, and then Aaron heard it 4 times. V'chulu, as written in Erevin. The time for was Rashi is made of v'chulu kedisa be'erevin. The reason why Rashi adds the word v'chulu, yeshleimar, as it is der mit merames if dem hemshach haGemara. The Rashi is alluding to the continuation of the Gemara. As noch dem wie Moshe hat verendigt seine firma lernen, that after Moshe taught it 4 times, shana lehen Aaron Pirkei. So then Aaron repeated it to them, and you'll see from the next paragraph it must be, and then Aaron left. Shana and Bon of Pirkon. Then the sons of Aaron taught it to everyone, and then they left. And then Shana and Skanim Pirkon, and then the Skanim taught it, and then they left. And by the V'chulu, to allude to this Gemara in Eruvin, which tells us that then Aaron would repeat it, then Bnei Aaron would repeat it, and then the Skanim would repeat it, it answers a very major question. Wie kommt es, als Aaron soll davon Aaron 4-mal, und für Bonav ist genug 3-mal, für das Kenim 2, für Kolon plays 1-mal? How could it be that Aaron needs to hear it 4 times, and the children need to hear it 3 times, the Kenim need to hear it 2 times, and the rest of the people only need to hear it 1 time? So it's the opposite of what makes sense. It would make sense that the people, Aaron was the holiest, the closest to Moshe. 1 time should be enough. Bnei Aaron, 2 times should be enough. Instead, the Gemara, the first part of the Gemara implies that Aaron heard it 4 times, and Bnei Aaron heard it 3 times, the Skanim heard it 2 times, and the Yidden only once. But according to the second part of the Gemara, that each of them then repeated it, then that question would be answered. Everyone heard it 4 times, because Aaron heard it 4 times from Moshe, but then the Bnei Aaron heard it 3 times from Moshe and 1 time from Aaron. And then the Skanim heard it 2 times from Moshe, and 1 time from Aaron, and 1 time from the Bnei Aaron is 4. And then the people heard it 1 time from Moshe, and 1 time from Aaron, and 1 time from the Bnei Aaron, and 1 time from the Skanim, again is 4. So the second way, it tells us that everybody heard it 4 times. It just depended who they heard it from. Aaron was the closest to Moshe, so all his 4 times were from Moshe. Whereas the Yidden, they heard it once from Moshe, and the rest from Moshe's Talmidim. But Alpiza Kumtois. But now there's a very interesting implication here. As andere Tzivui Yateira haben Yidden get nit information. So all of the other commandments of the Torah, the Yidden learned them not just from Moshe, but also from Aaron and Aaron's sons and the Skanim. Whereas when it comes to the commandment of building the Mishkan, it was different. Remember the question that Rabbi asked, why does it sound like this was a mini miyuchad, it was a unique appointment? The Rabbi is explaining, yes, it was a unique appointment, because all the other tzivuyim were conveyed through Moshe, through Aaron's sons, through the Skanim. But Sivi Melechas HaMishkan was done if kadeticha litzaveis no Melechas HaMishkan. I appointed you and only you to command about the building of the Mishkan. Ados übergeben zu ihnen dem Sivi Melechas HaMishkan wenn nicht leiten Seder Mishnah. That to convey the commandments of building the Mishkan was not done in the typical Seder Mishnah. No, we did tell Pereis Parsha Seinu Vayakhel Moshe Kol Adas Bnei Yisrael V'Yimir Aleim. Moshe gathered all the Yidden and spoke straight to them without going through Aaron, etc. Moshe had gered to the Al on chilukin zwischen Aaron und Banavas Kenim Kolam. that Moshe spoke to all the Yidden directly without going or differentiating between the various different levels. And that's what Rashi is saying in the first Rashi in Parashas Kisisa on this topic. V'ata daber el bnei Yisrael, you should speak to the Yidden. V'ata, you, that even though there's a unique appointment for you to teach the Melechas HaMishkan to the people, it should not be easy in your eyes. Since the commandment of building the Mishkan was given to Moshe in a very unique way, different from all the other commandments, as the Gabi Melechas HaMishkan Hakula in Shabbos, Moshe could have thought that since this is different than everything else, it implies some type of leniency. And the Rebbe adds an R40, especially since the faster they finish, the sooner they receive their kapara. And therefore, it might be easier in your eyes to override Shabbos for the building of the Mishkan, as im sein gering zu dechen sein Shabbos zu Melechas HaMishkan. Since he sees anyway this is different, and it was being given to him in this way, maybe this means that he can also be lenient about Shabbos. Therefore the Torah tells him, do not find it easy in your eyes, as on Litva and Akulu in Shabbos, don't turn this into a leniency on Shabbos. So this explains why there's two azharos, why there's two commandments. One is being told to Moshe that even though this is a very unique appointment, nevertheless it should not have any implications on the leniency of Shabbos. And then there's a separate commandment about the Yidden, that even though they're so rushed and so hasty to build a Mishkan to be able to get to the kapara, the atonement for the Chet HaEgel, nevertheless they should be careful. It shouldn't chas v'shalom lead to a desecration of Shabbos. Al Pizavet is varenfer bepashtos tishayla now the Kenman from Va'ata daber el bnei Yisrael upland the meaning from Al Yekal Beinacha, and this answers, because so for all the questions that we asked on these Rashis were already answered. Tarti Lamali, we asked the question, why do you need two? The answer is because one is for the Moshe, one is for the Yidden. Then we asked, this next question is not yet answered. We're about to answer it now. How do you get from Va'ata to Al Yekal Beinecha? Then we asked the question, what does it mean that there was a special appointment? The answer is because it was different the way Moshe taught it to the Yidden, that it went straight from Moshe without going through Aaron, etc. Why did it say Al Yekal Beinecha Lidchais and not very short, not concisely Al Tidacha? Because Rashi is telling us that Moshe could have thought that this is different because of the fact that there is a specific way in how he's doing this different than all the other ones. And that's why Rashi brings this new union of Redufin who's risen in the second Rashi, because when he talks about the Yidden, he has to explain why by the Yidden why Moshe has to warn the Yidden specifically, because they might be rushing too quickly to get to the kapara and to finish the Mishkan. The question that we didn't touch upon yet was question Beis, as in how do you get from the word Va'ata daber bnei Yisrael to the fact that Moshe might find it easy in his eyes to be lenient here. And here the Rebbe answers the question. The Apize is for him for the pastors Yishayla now. Vi Kenman from Va'ata daber bnei Yisrael up in the meaning from Al Yekal Beinecha. How do you get from Va'ata to the idea of being lenient on Shabbos? Since Moshe is being told that not only Melechas HaMishkan is to be done from Moshe directly and not through Aaron, but also the commandment of Shabbos is being done by Va'ata daber, is being done through Moshe. Moshe allein soll der sagen aliden ba'akola punkt vi hifkadeticha litzavesim Melechas HaMishkan. That also this was told to the gathering of the Yidden, just like Melechas HaMishkan. And Moshe actually carried this out. Vayakhel Moshe gathered the Yidden and told them about Shabbos. Is mudgish geworden zu Moshe, as Shabbos is nit kal be'esefen shehu, the guy of Melechas HaMishkan. Since Shabbos was included in the commandment to tell Moshe, to the commandment to Moshe to talk to the Yidden directly and not through Aaron, this told Moshe Al Yekal Beinecha, because you're being commanded to teach about Shabbos the same way you're teaching about Mishkan. This told Moshe that Shabbos is not more lenient than the Mishkan. And that's so in other words, Va'ata, because you are being commanded about Shabbos, just like you are being commanded about Meleches HaMishkan, you meaning Moshe, therefore this tells Moshe, Al Yekal Beinecha, it's the same level, the same level, meaning to say, it's being done in the same way, but from this you learn that Shabbos is not any more lenient than Meleches HaMishkan. Now, if you remember, but the whole reason we brought in these other two Rashis was to answer the question: why does Moshe feel that there's a emphasis is necessary when he talks to the Yidden, which because of which he said Shabbos first, even though when the Eibusha spoke to him, Shabbos was not first. Now, without even the Rebbe explaining it, you can now obviously understand from the fact that in the previous Rashi already told us that there's a concern because of the Yidden's rush to finish the project, that they might be nichshol chas v'shalom in Shabbos. And this explains why when Moshe actually fulfills the commandment of Hashem, he does so with an extra emphasis by putting Shabbos first. And this is what the Rebbe says in Siv Zayin. First, the Rebbe explains why Taka is in a different order. In Parshas Tisa was Tisa, when Hashem is speaking to Moshe, first, he talks about the Mishkan, und der Nachas are Shabbos, and then Shabbos. Weil der Iker is da der Tzivui from Nachas Mishkan. The main emphasis here of Hashem's talking to Moshe was about the building of the Mishkan. When Azara Shabbos kum da blaze al stafel. The prohibition of Shabbos is only a secondary piece. As Meleches HaMishkan is the Dikha Shabbos, that the building of the Mishkan should not override Shabbos. That's the right way to do it. In other words, when you say, if it's so important, why doesn't Hashem start with it? Because Hashem wasn't really talking about Shabbos. The thrust of Hashem's message to Moshe is to build a Mishkan. Go and tell the Yidden how to build a Mishkan. By the way, Moshe, keep in mind, Shabbos is very important here, and Shabbos should not override Mishkan. But the emphasis of Hashem's message here is Mishkan.